Okay, well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining today for the inaugural conversation that is part of Freedom Conversations, which is a celebration of the 7th anniversary of my company, Freedom, my branding and marketing consultancy. I'm so excited to have you here for my conversation with Reggie Black on vulnerability and design. So let's get started. The first thing I want to do to help us kind of get in the right mindset for this conversation is start with a quick exercise called a chatterfall. So if you're not familiar with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share a prompt in the chat. And what you will do is kind of finish the sentence or finish the prompt, but don't send it. Don't hit send. Wait until I say ready, and then we'll all share at the same time. So let me type it in now. Oh my gosh, if I could spell. So the prompt is, I'm interested in this topic because. So finish the prompt in the chat, but don't send it until I give you the go ahead. Okay, everybody, I think everyone should be finished. So everyone go ahead and hit send now. Yay. Okay, so someone's interested in rebranding their practice, listening to designers talk, another brand designer who wants to learn more, someone who's curious about design and how artists approach their work, vulnerability is power. So this is great. It just helps us see kind of where you are and what you're interested in. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So I'm so excited to be chatting with Reggie Black. There are three things that I find most interesting about Reggie is he is, I guess what people are calling now a multi-hyphenate. So media artist, designer, speaker. He's based in Washington, D.C., but his practice really extends all around the world. So he's worked and exhibited in Bangkok, Hong Kong, New York City, Tokyo, and DC. So he really combines the local and the global. Something else that I find really interesting about Reggie is that he is self-taught. And he has this really distinctive approach that I really haven't seen that combines hand type with, which is, an analog kind of way of art making and design with digital techniques. And he uses that practice to explore trauma, hope, and optimism. And then thirdly, I'm really fascinated by the way that practice has come alive in the projects that he's done. And I encourage you to check out his Instagram at Reggie Black to kind of be able to see the visuals of these projects. So a billboard series in LA that was sponsored by Ava DuVernay's Area Alliance, a public projection on a farmhouse in New York, the Dykeman Farmhouse. And then he also reimagined the logo of the Phillips Collection, which is a museum in DC in honor of their 100th birthday. And of course, I'm also thrilled because he redesigned the Freedom logo, especially to celebrate the 7th anniversary of the business. And then how we know one another. I think the first time I became aware of Reggie was at an exhibit in DC called Umbrella. And Reggie had a room full of his work, and it was both things that were kind of framed on the wall traditionally with posters and hats. So it was art that was accessible at a lot of different price points and a lot of different ways. And And then I think from there, Reggie, maybe Allison
Yeah.
Bechet might have connected us, and then
Yep.
it was off to the races.
Yeah, that's how it happened. I know everybody through Allison. That's how it happened.
Exactly.
No, but it was we had just got back from Bangkok. First, let me back up a little bit. That intro was amazing. I sometimes forget all the things that I do, so because I'm always trying to rush to do the next thing. So for a moment, for the next 45 minutes, we'll just pause and sit still. And I will like to thank you all for joining and be appreciative of that amazing intro, Leigh. And yeah, you're right. I think it was doing the project with Nina from Monochrome when we had first back from living abroad from 2014 to 2018. And the No Kings Collective had a show. And it was in the old Martha's Table in DC. And I'm currently in Houston. So if I keep saying in DC, that's because I'm like geographically like orientate myself. And we just got back from New Orleans. Nevertheless, yeah, it was a show that the No Kings Collective had sponsored and put on, where I believe it was like a bunch of different artists that had the opportunity to kind of transform a room. And at that time, I was also in the process of opening a gallery in DC. And so I took on this project just to kind of, I guess, reintroduce or introduce people to my work, knowing that we would be moving back to the US. And that's where we met. And I don't know if you were able to get something at that show. It was like super fine that you kind of got, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
And
where
so,
that comes from.
yeah, well, it's gonna be weird to keep looking at that. That's like one of the only
Yeah,
pieces that I would like to buy back. I
I know.
love that piece. I
I'm
love that.
changing the subject immediately
I
now.
love that piece.
You're not
But
getting it back.
so yeah, and then we met, and then Allison, who's been a long time friend of mine, forever, and knew I think what 3 years now. Um, Strategist and manager for the things that we create. So sometimes I'll say we because it's a team. My wife used to do it for several years, and then I kind of hassled Allison to do it and asked her several times, and so now here we are.
Yeah.
But yep,
Yeah.
that's how we met.
Well, yeah. So let's dive in. I want to talk about the logo that you designed because I think it was a really interesting process that I want to share. So, I was approaching the 7th anniversary of Freedom, and I wanted to do something, and I kind of felt like my business had evolved,
Mm,
and the logo that I was using didn't really kind of reflect um, how the company had evolved. And I was also getting more and more interested in a different way of looking at logos and visual identity, of being more flexible. I was looking at bands, specific like Haim I'm obsessed with, and I was looking at how that their logo changed from album to album, but you still could recognize, that it was a Haim album. And then there was a design studio called Studio Gradient that was founded by people that worked on the Biden campaign. And every year they would totally redesign their visual identity and their website, almost like uh, like in the way that fashion has different collections for different seasons. And so I immediately thought of Reggie as someone that I wanted to partner with because he takes this such an unusual approach, combining kind of hand type with digital. So can you kind of share your approach and how we work together and how you ended up with the mark that you ultimately created?
Um, I gotta be honest, Lee. I think your project was one of the tougher ones. um,
Oh,
so where do we start? Everything always starts with first and foremost, just kind of me. I don't have any tools with me. I do, but they're like over there, and I'm not getting up because I think that won't look visually cool for the talk. But every project starts with me just kind of messing around and creating marks. And if those that don't know how I work, maybe I should get up. Can I? I'm sorry. This is
yeah, no, it's fine. This is
awful.
casual, informal.
I don't have many because of traveling, but so I'm self-taught as Leigh mentioned in the beginning, and with that being said, like I didn't go to traditional art school. I've kind of learned all the rules. I've spent my life, fighting for the creativity that I believe needs to live in the world. Design clothes, which is where I met Allison. I think Kia's on here too, where we kind of worked back and forth. So I've lived a life of creativity, but I went to school for branding and marketing. And so, as my son says, sometimes I might cheating because I have like two hats, gallery director. So I come from a multitude of things. And when designing a project, it typically starts with us getting like a brief. So I think when we all met, Leigh, Allison, and I, we had a conversation, and we kind of really took this deep dive about like the not hip hop specifically, but the music of genre music, and talked about how different brands kind of branded and did things in this way that throughout their career, you could see the evolution of a brand or a band or a person. One of my favorites is Prince, who kind of did it for me. Like when you watch his logos kind of evolve, or Michael Jackson from the Off the Wall album to like the Remember the Time album, you kind of always knew it was Mike. In a more contemporary space, I think I love how Jay-Z does it, where he kind of eventually disappears from the branding. His first album cover, it was him as bold as ever on the cover, and then we got to 444, and it was just letters. And so we talked about where we would pull inspiration from. Leigh shared an amazing wealth of knowledge from the music of the 70s. I was not born in the 70s, but my mom and aunts and everybody, like, I mean, Saturday mornings being in like a black household on a Saturday or any day for that matter, there was music. So, James Brown, Marvin Gaye, Otis Redding, Aretha Franklin, Teddy Pendergrass, all of that was kind of ingrained into my life very early. And so I knew exactly where we could go. I took a trip to New York. Alice and I, we hit a couple of record shops. We love to do this thing where we like divide and conquer. She'll go off and think about stuff. I'll go off and think about stuff. And then we'll try to meet in the middle to see what is the comparison. And what I loved about working with on this project with you, Leigh, was that there was no real direction in terms of creative control. I think thank you once again for trusting me and my abilities to be able to do that. And so Alice and I kind of went on this research and development trip. We had a great time, and then from there, I'm just kind of left alone to kind of go and create. For those that know me, that's like a real weird time because I can't answer the phone. I'm like in the house. It's a very isolated project. And I just kind of started picking up tools. And when I was abroad living in Asia, I instantly just kind of fell in love with the stationary culture. Before we left the US, I wasn't really involved in tools and like instruments and writing instruments. There was a traditional spray paint can. But when we got to Asia, I just really saw like how Chinese calligraphy was implemented. I remember one time we were in Beijing and we just saw this gentleman with like a huge like calligraphy mop, like creating on the street. And so I always thought about, all right, well, since I know I'm self-taught and I know I'm not traditionally trained, how can I re-engineer all of my life and global experiences in a way that could be unique to my work? And so that's why when you'll see a piece, sometimes you'll see like the one that you see behind Leigh, it's very graffiti inspired, but the truth is I don't know how to like have like traditional can control like you would see like a muralist use. And so I've kind of implemented and adopted techniques that allow me to manipulate the can in a way that's unique to my style. Moving to something like a bamboo brush, which is essentially like a smaller version of what I saw that gentleman utilizing when we were in Beijing. And so a lot of my creations come from just direct ink and materials like that. And then, back to me trying to fall in love with graffiti. I'll use something as thick as this it's empty because you can kind of like fill it whatever color you want and refill it. Um, and so I'm just left at the table and, for a length of time, days, weeks, I think this was like a month, couple months, right? Months. I was just making marks and trying to figure it out and trying to work it out. And we landed on a group of something new that we tried for this project. We've been trying to evolve my hand type and figure out a way to kind of reintroduce it so it doesn't feel as monotonous. Not that I don't ever think it does, but I've just been in conversation with Allison a lot about like how can we push the hand type so it to have some kind of range and dynamics. And so if when you do get a chance to look at Leigh's new logo, you'll notice that I used three different writing instruments to create this work. And that was because we wanted to see how this could work as a cohesive narrative. The F and the R were done with a Posca, not in the way that I traditionally use it. And I'll probably just drop names of these markers as if I think you all know them. But if you don't, like, I'll kind of illustrate. So a Posca almost has like this sort of nib. And I just kind of, instead of me using this entire width, there was more of me kind of riding the edge. So when you look at the F, when you see how it's kind of cursive, it literally came from this edge, if you will. And I'll get into the digital side of it, so I won't bore you with the analog. So once all the marks are made, then it's converted into Illustrator, and it's no manipulation. The letters are what they are, but we put it in Illustrator for scale and for application. And so that's where this kind of beautiful dance of analog and digital for my work has derived from. Me playing with letters, loving stationery, all the way dated back to like going to stationery shops with my grandma back in the day. I've always loved stationery. I've always loved pens. I used to like write in like church programs when I was forced to stay in church all day with my folks. So I've always loved like stationery and pens. I used to get an A in penmanship in school. They don't grade that anymore, I know. So I might be like dating myself. And then moving it into Adobe is just a way for it to be applied in different applications, which is how you'll have the color story. You'll have the different ways we can utilize the logo, whether it's social, print, et cetera, et cetera.
Great. What was so interesting to me about, I think, this project, and then also the work you did with the Phillips collection, where they commissioned many different artists and designers to reimagine their logo for their 100th anniversary, is that traditionally modern design has been all about almost erasing the designer or the designer's identity as an author, right? Because you want to be, it's anonymous because really it belongs to the corporation, the corporate identity. But I think of your scripts as being very uncompromising in their personality and in their humanness and in their vulnerability. Can you share more about the role of vulnerability in your practice and how you kind of came to that approach?
I think it was me as a person first. I think the way that I've been able to kind of, if you know me, you know I'm like a HSP, a highly sensitive person, and so I feel like me first and foremost bringing that to the work is kind of why people entrusted me to present the work. And so I think the letters caught up to who I was as a person. I was just online typing things, saying things, posting things, taking pictures of where we were around the world, where I am in DC, and they were all attached to a vulnerable offering. I'm very vocal about my struggles with addiction. I'm very vocal about, you know, my life and pretty much being an open book. And then what happens when I get to the studio and create work, I feel like that same energy is transformed into the artwork. Now, fortunately, I know that this isn't typically that artists, you know, evolve and work. Like most of the time, like you said, they'll hire you to do something. I feel like we've just been very intentional about the things we roll out, where it's uncompromising, where people begin to love that. And so I think I'm very fortunate and blessed in that way, where for the most part, I don't think I've ever had a project that I was required to do something that someone was like told me to do. It was more like, hey, we want Reggie Black, and how can he implement that? And I think that was the way that we were able to bring in me as the author and designer into the story, opposed to it being this kind of anonymous, like, you know, designer that you saw behind the screen. So I think it's more rooted in personality. Me saying, hey, this is who I am as an artist. these are all the things I care about, and I'm just going to use these tools to illustrate them.
Yeah. I also wonder, because you're self-taught, you weren't institutionalized, for lack
Yeah,
of a better word, into a
yeah,
certain way of thinking or a certain kind of practice
yeah.
or certain kind of expectations that this is the way we do design.
Sure, sure, and
And only if you want to be good, you have to do it this way versus a
sure.
different way.
I mean, but there's all, that's a great point, and I thank you for bringing that up, because within not being institutionalized, there's a lot of insecurity in that, because you don't feel
Mm,
like you can stand up with the designers. You know what I mean? Like, I just saw
right.
my guy Obi hop in. He's an amazing designer. I'll never sit next to him on the table to try to like design with him, because I look like an idiot. You know what I mean? But I feel like with that, I don't have the blind, I don't have the blinders up. I'm kind of
Yeah.
looking at it from an
Mhm.
entire scope of how to bring the
Yeah.
work to me and to my work, and I think that that's a level of
Right.
freedom that my work.
Yeah.
But there are
Yeah.
insecurities with that. It's like, oh, I can't do certain things as strong. But I once
Yeah.
again, leaning back to the vulnerability piece, that's the power that I've been able to lend into and lean into, if you will, to kind of empower my work.
Yeah. And I think too that because you're kind of outside of those systems,
Hmm.
you're able to comment on them and reflect on them
Yep.
through your practice in a way that someone who uh, was trained and schooled and professionalized doesn't have that kind of perspective or
Sure,
distance.
sure. I think honestly, maybe 70% of my creative process is being in the world and experiencing things, and then I like go make it. So it's not me trying to like. Of course, I want to get better at learning the grids and all the things that they teach in design school, but I'm more inspired by conversations with people that I have. I'm more inspired by my mom and my wife and single moms, and conversations with Allison, and conversations about race and food, and all the things
Yeah.
make art. I'm really inspired by almost like the things that are the complete opposite of it. That's why I was so inspired by
Yeah.
how the approach that we took with music, because I mean that's like my bloodline.
Yeah.
I come from all genres of music, and I love it. And so when we dove into this work, it was
Yeah.
almost like it was like the layup for success.
Yeah. And I think, looking at record covers, and I still buy vinyl, so I call them records,
Yeah,
is um, you do realize that, bands, whatever, hip hop artists, musical artists are constantly evolving their look, right?
yep.
Or their identity. And why can't companies do that? And so I think it was really fun to kind of collaborate with you on like, well, what if a company did act like a band?
And I
And
think it's a
it's
brilliant
something I'm
idea.
still
Yeah.
exploring.
I think it's a brilliant idea. Maybe for brand recognition, I do understand that if you're offering a product or service in the world, you want someone in Taiwan to be able to identify it if they were in Brooklyn, New York. And so I do get that there's a seamless sort of continuity that you want your brand to have. But I am curious to see like what does an evolving brand identity look like? And Paula Scher had talked about that on her abstract
Mm,
um, episode on Netflix. If you all are like into design at all, you should check it out. She was saying how
yeah.
she designed the public theater's identity system 10 times and no one even blinked an eye. Or another fun one for the nerds, the Tate in London, that entire institution, they've been tweaking their identity for the last 75 years. Point mex like almost like 2 megapixels of an inch, just so it could blur out and become like a blob. And I only know that because I was like studying when I was working on an identity for the gallery that I had built. And I just thought that that was fascinating for them to take that type of
Mm,
time to consider what it would look like for an identity to evolve. So when you look at it, it's like the most crisp tape possible. And now if you look at it, it's
yeah.
almost like it's been distorted, like an old like David Carson cover for a rock band, which is
Right,
phenomenal for
right.
me. Yeah.
Yeah, especially for a major institution to
especially
be
for a
that
major
kind of,
institution to be that, bold and kind of provocative to do something like that. I
yeah,
thought it was brilliant.
yeah. Um, so I recently watched your TED Talk, and I encourage everyone to go watch it if you haven't already. There's a link on the event page. And during the talk, you said art is the act of presenting your flaws with courage and honesty, which is
Mm,
something I really loved. And you suggested that that's what makes us all art,
mm,
because we're all here kind of being human, trying to be ourselves with courage and honesty. And another quote that I love is confront what makes you uncomfortable and make your fear your work of art.
mm.
So, can you talk a little bit about the relationship between vulnerability, fear, and art, and why facing our fears is so important and powerful?
I'm so impressed that you went back to like 2016, and at that time, this is a part of my career that I try to leave out just because it was a horrible business ending, but it was an important one. Some people may or may not know, like there was a time in my career for like a 7 year span where I used to do this project called Sticky Inspiration. And what it entailed was that every day I would get up and try to write something inspirational and post it around the world somewhere and leave it. And I would do it in this anonymous fashion for a couple of weeks until Instagram launched. And then I thought it was a perfect platform to offer it on because of the square and the application, and you can post it, and it could also reach more people. And so, fast forward to the TED Talk, I wasn't even into typography and stuff like I am now. That was me honestly just trying to use my love for vulnerability, fear, and trying to become an artist to say something on that stage. Um, those quotes were honestly just me thinking about, or almost probably now thinking about it in 2022, trying to project or affirm the artist that I knew I could become. But back then, there was no Illustrator, there was no Adobe, there was no exhibitions. No one really cared about the work. Um, Sticky Inspiration was an important part of my career because it allowed me to kind of articulate and execute this level of discipline I've never been able to. So every day before 7 a.m., 7 days a week, no matter where I was up kind of writing something on a post-it note, going outside in the snow and the cold, like on a poster, on a pole, on a street pole. I was somewhere in the world, and it kind of fired up this level of discipline and built a community of people that started to uh, grant me the permission, if you will, to hear my voice. And which ultimately that was the project that led me to land the TED residency, which ultimately allowed me to give that TED talk. So there wasn't even like these things were non-existent. I had no commissions or work or anything. I think those quotes were me just me committing to not give up on the artist that I knew I could be.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I instead of using the word discipline, I would use the word habit, or that's the
Mm,
word that I use to describe things that I do every day.
mm-hmm.
Is uh, and I think, we often think of art or design or anything creative as like this stroke of genius, right?
Mm-hmm.
That you kind of like have this flash, and then you go off and you like heads down work and wait for the next strike of inspiration.
Yeah.
When, to your point, really, it's just showing up every day,
Yep. Yep.
just showing up every day and doing something, and putting it out there for other,
Yep.
and not, not being afraid to be vulnerable, putting it out there, waiting on just to see what happens, and being open to what people think, all of those things. So I think that's one of the things I love about Sticky Inspiration is it I do something similarly, which is I committed to writing every day, and it wasn't
Mm.
enough to just write. To hold myself accountable, I said, you have to write something that can be posted online.
Yep.
So you have an hour, you have to write about something,
Yep.
and it has to be in some format that is readable, that you can share. on LinkedIn, and it's so interesting because I think what I found is the things I thought sounded awful and were stupid, people have liked the most.
Yep.
And the things that I thought was amazing, I wouldn't get much feedback on. But
I
it's
mean,
just about showing up every day.
here's the thing. I feel like every element of our individual stories give the courage to someone else to do something.
Mm.
And there's this beautiful, brutal, painful thing in sharing what you're going through, as weird as it may sound to the world, that you're like, being a Drake, like, if you will, whatever they call it, like you're pouring your emotions out to the world. But what I feel like it does, it gives people the power to feel like they're not alone in a certain situation. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's why I've always just been really dedicated to saying the things that I feel near and dear to my heart, whether it was graphically cool enough to satisfy, people that might be in school and work at Pentagram, or if my sister, who was trying to find her way out of a job into another career, could resonate with it.
Yeah.
I think there's a Tumblr of, I think it's stickyinspiration.tumblr.com, where you could probably go. I never deleted the page. I just
Oh,
got into like a funky business situation that I just, you know, decided that it was
yeah.
time to close it down. However, I do think that if anybody is curious to like go back and search for that era of my life, I do think that the Tumblr is still active. It's like 7 years of
Yeah.
writing up there, and I think it's
Wow.
stickyinspiration.tumblr.com. I feel like if I
That's
can
amazing.
drop it in the chat, I will. But I definitely
Yeah.
think it's still active if anybody wants to see where it all kind of started and came from.
And I think there's a thread through to the present, because I know on Instagram, I don't know if you do this every Monday or every day, but I know you, especially in stories, you'll just
Yep.
share. I don't even know what to call it. It's just like it's it's spiritual. It's
Are you
just kind
talking
of
about?
like this centering
Oh yeah, yeah.
practice of like I I'm kind of at a loss for words, because I know when I read them, it just kind of helps me. It centers me and helps me kind of like let the stress drain away and really focus on, okay,
Mhm.
what's really important in this moment.
Mhm.
So I
I haven't.
appreciate that.
Thank you for that. I haven't given that a name yet. It's a recently new thing, and it was derived from my evolving relationship with meditation. I started to get into Buddhism and reading about Buddhism when we were living in Asia, and I started meditating almost like 5 to 6 times a week now. And then I think Monday is my favorite day of the week. I love Mondays. I love the mornings, and there's something about like setting the intentions of the week. And so that kind of new week thing, it doesn't have a name, but it's just like a black and white. And more times than many, Leigh, I'm like talking to myself, but just like putting it out there
Yeah,
for everyone
exactly.
else. You know what I mean? Like, all right, Reggie, what do you need to do this week? What's the focus? And then I just kind
Yeah,
of like write it, and then I know somebody somewhere else is kind of feeling the exact same thing.
yeah,
And so that
me.
the through line of me just saying, all right, well, if you feel it, I know you're not alone. And if you're going through, especially, I guess, the 3 years that we've all had together, right? Like COVID was this one
Mhm.
time where no matter your race, your financial status, your location, whatever it was, like we were all in this very kind of dark phase. And for a lot of us, it's still kind of gradually climbing out of it, or still in whatever storm, whatever that looks like to you. But it was that one time that we could all kind of experience the same thing, and that new week thing is just me kind of nudging everybody like, all right, we can keep pushing together.
Yeah. Um, I've noticed that you, in addition to that practice, you have many practices that focus on mental health, and that's
Hmm.
something that's really important to you. Can you talk a bit about why you're so passionate about mental health and how it relates to your practice?
Mm, wow, that was good. I think for a large percentage of my life, I've struggled with depression. I've struggled with being bipolar. it wasn't up until recently, I guess within the last 5 years, 5, 7 maybe, when I started going to therapy and seeking help about all the traumas of life that I was carrying around. And as a black man, like growing up, and even to this day, that's a no-no. Like, we are taught to be strong. We are taught to carry the weight of our shoulders. We are taught not to cry. We are taught not to, suck it up, as they say, and so when I was able to kind of understand what all of that meant to me and for me, I just went on this obsessive nature to really try to undo all the traumas that I was given or inherited, for lack of better terms, throughout my life. And I know that there is a stigma around mental health that a lot of people don't really want to kind of dance with or get involved with because of how it looks. Um, but what I do think that there is space for mental health to be redesigned. And so what I'm trying to do with my work is just like, how do we allow this kind of cool nature of what Reggie is saying in his art, in his posts, and his talks and conversations? How can we re-engineer what mental health looks like? And then you tag on my upcoming sobriety anniversary of 9 years, me struggling with alcohol on Halloween. It's a weird day. Don't act. It's a story about how that happened. But so then tagging that on to uh, addiction and coming from a family of addiction, like I know we all have in some regard. I was just honestly kind of the one that was saying, well, if everybody in this space is like talking about, other things that are cool, I'm into all the things that people talk about. How can I use my voice to kind of talk about something that's unique to me and use that in a way that can kind of offer support to other people? And so mental health is something that my grandmother recently passed earlier this year, and as we're like digging through her life, I'm learning that she struggled. I have aunts and uncles who struggle,
Mm,
but we would have never known had no one knew. It was just something that we didn't talk about, and I think I was the
right.
first one to be like, all right, I'm gonna talk about it, and so that's why I'm very vocal about it in public, because I think whatever family you belong to, we come from something, and I'm just trying to use my words and language because it might soften it a bit. I feel like like it
Mm,
might. Uh, Most people are like, oh, I don't want to go, sit on the couch and talk to the shrink. But it's like, man, like,
right.
how can we redefine that language and offer it in a way that the palate is softened so we can really get the help that we need.
Yeah. You talked a bit about mental health in the context of your experience as a Black man, and
Yep.
I feel like race has become more and more important, especially in the big public work that you do.
Yep. Yep.
Um, so the billboards and the projections, um, to me, when I look at them, it's like making the invisible visible. It's
Yep.
forcing us as a country, as a community, to confront unpleasant truths. Can you talk a bit about the evolution of your work and how that
Wow.
came to be more of a focus?
It was COVID, and I have to credit 100% my wife Shantae. We were sitting at home, and I think Alice and I, we were all talking and maybe not talking. We were probably all crying together and just trying to get through the world. It was the uprising of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and here I am, a Black man making work that felt very loose, if you will. It had this kind of like inspirational you could approach
Mm,
to it. Um, and once again, we're talking about vulnerability. It was something that I had always struggled with as an artist. It was like, well, you're not like traditionally trained. You don't have what it takes just to kind of like shoot through the ranks. So how about you just kind of be as generic as possible so that everybody
mm,
your work, so no one like pigeonholed you into a specific place for your work to stand on. Like, oh, he's a Black artist that's doing a Black thing, that's doing a it was a lot of mental stuff that I was going. It's like, well, what if I get cornered into a specific part of the art market where I'm never able to like reach the masses. But we know that that's false because we have people, you know, like the Tyler Perrys of the world who have clearly engineered the entire industry on focusing about Black narratives. And so we were in the house one day, and you know, sitting in front of this huge computer, crying about the world. And Shantae basically just kind of came into my studio and was like, "Listen, dude, like I think now's the time for you to kind of ramp up and really speak to." I mean, honestly, if no one else is going to do it, I mean, not no one else is going to do it. If you're not going to do it as a Black man, then you might as well just kind of pack it up. And it
Wow.
was it was that conversation that just changed everything. And then I think we landed a couple opportunities. Ava came in. We were able to do that. I think No Records was first. It was just this weird energy where, you know, we were getting requests and Allison was like, "Hey, you want to do this? What do you think about that?" That we had literally made this intentional decision to focus on race and my perspective as a Black man, but it wasn't always there. Not that I was afraid of being Black. I'm never that person. I think it was more so like, man, well, what if I get like cast out? You know, what if I'm not able to like share what I really want to say to people? And then when the world was on fire, I was just like, all right, fuck it, like, roll with it because I think now we need everybody a part of this because it's the most important thing that's happening in this country right now. And we leaned into it, and project after project started to present itself to do that type of work. And I must say that I feel like it's my like most cherished body of work that I think
Mm.
maybe no records, maybe Allison. I don't know, like no records all the way up. I feel like I've hit a stride just by not being afraid to speak directly to who I am, and the Nina Simone quote where it's like, you know, art must reflect the times. So
Mm.
if I'm walking around and be this cool Black man and completely omit of what's going on in the world, as Shantae said when she walked in, she's like, "Listen, dude, just pack it up and do something else because you are not representing what's really necessary at the
Mhm.
time." And so
Right.
yeah, that was the turning point. There was no evolution. It was literally like a day, and then and then, and then it was just like, all right, well, no records. Get Home Safe, the collaboration that we did with Soho House, was another important one. Directly talks to this fear that we have as Black people to, you know, growing up, you would see your homie at school, "All right, man, holler at me later, get home safe." We would see it as a term of endearment and love for one another. "I'll see you tomorrow." But, you know, as we have all seen in this country, that the truth of the matter is like there is like a 50, 60, 70% chance that some days you might not get home safe. And so doing that with
Mm.
Soho House, speaking to that, um, which they're based in London. Like it was something that we just felt like was important, and so we just been able to kind of really use language and use my typography in a way that could like make me more vulnerable in the space to really talk about the things that matter. Because I listen to
Yeah.
rap, like I love Kendrick, I love Tupac, I love Biggie, and they were all talking about a specific Black narrative. One of my
Right.
best friends, Jason Reynolds, is a author who writes books for, Black children. So I'm around it. It's like, all right, dude, like just lean into it and roll with it. My brother
Yeah.
teaches Black children. We were just at the Whitney plantation yesterday, whether this matters or not, or connected, and I just saw this kind of like fear or delicacy. I think that was the word I used on social media. As my mom, who's 73, she
Mm.
through the plantation with like gentle steps. And then there was just something beautiful about how she would
Mm.
usher my brother along the tour for us to kind of walk and like be proud and realize that like, yo, we're here. I'm 73, but you're 38. And don't you ever forget like this is where we come from now. Going out there and make sure that you keep
Yeah.
representing. Um, so yeah, it was a complete deliberate decision, and I'm grateful for Shante for that.
That's amazing. It almost feels to me that you're taking kind of level of personal vulnerability and
Yeah.
recognizing that, like, as a society, as a larger community, we need to be
Yeah.
vulnerable, and that
Yeah.
you're kind of giving voice to that, which is, I think, just so incredibly
You know,
powerful.
I've always felt that. I was just trying to figure out like how to package it. I think I've always felt that, I'll have conversations with, some of my male friends about our relationships with our fathers. I'll have conversations with some of my friends who are Black women and their responsibility, and not their responsibility, their power of how they've saved this country time and time again. I'll have all these conversations about, vulnerable moments that we all share, or our upbringings, or, all these different things. And it was just like, all right, how do you package it and present it in a way that everybody could understand it? And then honestly, this is the first time we kind of said, just really not even caring if everybody understood it anymore.
Yeah,
Because
right.
that was the thing. It was like, oh man, like I'll never be able to get in the galleries. I'll never be able to. And then here comes, the Kehinde Wileys and the Derek Adams and, all these contemporary artists, which we had in the past, Kerry James Marshall and all these guys. But truth be told, like it wasn't really cool to be Black up until like a couple of years ago, like not
Mm.
for lack of better terms, right? Like it wasn't as globally successful and
Or it
accepted.
wasn't cool to white people
It wasn't cool to white
to
people.
be a
Like we
Black person.
had
Yeah.
our own thing. And it's this weird thing that I was struggling with. Like, all right, if I want to make it the Damien Hirst status or whatever artist that I could conjure up and think about the success that I wanted to have, I had to appeal to a bunch of people. And the truth of the matter was, I didn't. It was me in a way. I was the mountain.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, on that note, I want to leave a few minutes for questions before we close with a reflection.
Sure.
Does anyone have any questions for Reggie? You can just pop them in the chat. Okay. Well, I would like to move to a reflection. Just, I feel like we've covered a lot and talked about a lot. So similar to how we started at the beginning, I'm going to share a prompt in the chat and then give you a few minutes or a few moments to complete this, and then don't share it in the chat until I give you the go ahead. So what was helpful for me today was
Oh, maybe I should contribute to this as well.
okay. Okay. Okay, fingers down. And everyone share how you responded to the prompt. So, listening to someone who presented his authentic self and how he used design to navigate real world issues. Thinking about the big picture for my future. That is a lot. I see others are finishing up. Releasing the preconceived notion that my voice didn't matter. And Reggie. Listening to a voice other than the one in my head as a break in my day. That is always wonderful. So then this next prompt is something I'm chewing on, is something that you're still kind of mulling over from the talk, from the conversation. Okay, let's all share. Where am I in the way of my work? What is there for me to be, make, ask that I've told myself stories to get out of? That's lovely. The value of reinvention and reimagining identity as a superpower. I love that. How one delivered decision can change the trajectory of your life. How to bring more of my art into my design practice. These are all amazing. And then finally, our last, oh, I see one more person is typing, and so I'll let them.
Hey, it's Veronica. Hey, Veronica.
Yeah. The power of reinvention. And finally, the final reflection, potential follow-up action. So what do you hope to take into the world and do next following this conversation? Okay, everyone hit send. So we have, think more about bringing my whole self to my work. Keep poking Reggie for that coffee chat.
Oh, Dana, yeah, we have to do that. We have to do that. We definitely have to.
But actually thinking about those regular habits of writing and sharing. Habits are so powerful. Following through on my ideas, even if they don't feel complete, that's so important. Ask bolder questions.
There was a real quickly. I wrote that because we were sitting around the house maybe like 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, and my son Tewan asked me, he's like, "Hey man, do you know what your name means?" And I was like, "Nah, I never even like thought about like asking." He's like, "Well, let's Google." And it was probably because I just like have always had a weird relationship with my father, and so we look up the word Reggie and Reginald, and it means like bold king, and I was just like, "What? Nobody ever told me that." Like ruler, advisor, conqueror, bold.
Oh yeah.
And I just gotta like step more into
Be
that.
bold.
Yeah. I mean,
Exactly.
I feel like I have, but that was kind of a weird tie-in.
Well, thank you so much, Reggie, for your time and your ideas and sharing more about your practice with us. And thank you to all of you that showed up. I was telling Reggie, this is kind of an experiment for me. I wanted to celebrate my business anniversary. I wanted to do something that wasn't just all about me, but to kind of give back and share more with my community. So thank you for signing up and being interested in this project. I hope that you consider coming to other conversations ahead. On October 20th, I'm talking to Eric Kramer on storytelling that creates trust. And then on October 27th, Katie Drecke about sourcing inspiration. And I will put, here is the link where you can sign up for the other conversations. And with that, you can all go on and continue with your day, hopefully more inspired and excited about your day, week, month, and year ahead. So thank you so much.
Leigh, thank you for the conversation. Thank you everyone for attending. This was awesome. I appreciate you all.